Welcome to Thriving Beyond, the podcast with stories of thriving through when the obstacles are far from few. Here's your host, whose own story has been featured in Chicken Soup for the Soul, Vidal Cisneros Jr.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Thriving Beyond. I'm excited. Today we have Jason Treu with us, very highly decorated. He's the author of the book titled Social Wealth. So Jason has graduated with a law degree and master's in communication from Syracuse University. He's spent 7 years in Silicon Valley working with leaders such as Steve Jobs, Mark Cuban, and others at companies such as Apple, HP, Microsoft, Oracle, Pixar, Yahoo, and many others. Holy cow, I'm losing my breath talking about this. So he's helped clients meet top influencers such as Richard Branson, Bill Gates, Tim Cook, Peter Diamandis, Chris Anderson, and others. And he also wrote the number one best-selling book that I mentioned, Social Wealth, that's been number one in 4 business categories on Amazon and sold over 40,000 copies. He's spoken and been a guest expert on more than 400 podcasts, radio, and television shows. And he has helped clients generate over $1 billion in wealth over the past 3 years. Wow. I am excited to have Jason Treu with us. Jason, welcome to Thriving Beyond, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show and speaking to your fantastic tribe.
Absolutely, man. The honor's all ours. And let's get into this. Sum up what you do in one sentence or less, because I think I highlighted like a paragraph of what you've done.
Yeah, I mean, basically what it is, I work with corporate executives and entrepreneurs to help them create, behavioral change and to really get rid of patterns that no longer serve them anymore. And when you're looking in a corporate setting, that either is an individual or a group of individuals, and those things can be coming from business challenges, personal challenges, changing culture. It's a whole variety of things depending on really that person and what it is that they need to do and what are the thing or things that are causing them the greatest pain.
Right on. Gotcha. So Jason, is there a morning ritual that you implement as a speaker, as this guy that's the secret weapon for CEOs that helps ignite your mornings?
Yeah, there's some, what I find is a challenge with these morning rituals is that they work for the person doing them. And I think they probably work typically for a minority set of people, but a lot of us, they just don't fit within what's going to get us excited, motivated, or actually help us. So my whole thought on these morning rituals is that if you start off by doing things that take you 2 minutes or less to do, and then you can work yourself up to 5 minutes or other things to do that are really helpful. For instance, some people work out in the morning and that's way better because if they don't do it, they can't. Well, then that's something that you should do, right? But for me, I do it when I can, but if I do it every day, there's a lot of resistance. So I'm like, okay, it's fine to do it then, but I don't need to do it all the time. So one thing that I do that I think is very helpful and I've been doing is I wake up every day and I tell myself this is going to be another great day as usual. And I set my mind that the day is going to be fantastic and everything in it is going to help me in one way or another. And that intention also makes it so when something negative happens, I look and see what actually happens beyond that, right? I mean, I was doing a podcast a couple 3 weeks ago. And I was sitting there in this video podcast and I had this thing scheduled and person recording it has done a couple hundred of them and somehow it just didn't work, right? We had tried it 3 times and I'm like, I'm really frustrated to put this time aside. But I was like, whatever, schedule it, move on. Well, what happened was I was in to see a client of mine and I was using a conference room where I got to run into the CEO of the company who I've got a great relationship with. And we talked about some things. And it actually was a really great conversation. And the only way that I would have ever had that conversation is because the other podcast didn't work. Because if it didn't, I would have never ran into him. So I think it's important to do that. I think the other thing I do is I put a grateful list together of 3 things that I'm grateful for, right? And it's something you can do in 15 seconds. When you have something new you can do every day, like, today I was grateful I went to the Dallas Cowboys game yesterday. I was grateful this morning I took my Jack Russell Terrier, on a walk. I was grateful today in Dallas it's 75 degrees instead of 90 something. So if you do that every day, what happens is you look at the world of abundance and you seek out the things that are positive instead of negative. And what happens then, you start looking like that, and it starts changing your morning and your day because you see all the positive things. Otherwise, what happens is that any negative thing can put you into that mindset, and you can start looking at scarcity and what you don't have. And that, again, will change the color of your day and the impact you'll have on the people around you. So the two things, again, I'd put would be one, just say, it's another great day as usual when you wake up, and then 3 things that you're grateful for, and that will probably take you under 30 seconds to do.
I so love that, Jason. Power of gratitude and the power of setting intentions. Getting that intentional mindset awakened first thing in the morning is super important, and getting that eye on the North Star that your day is going to be a great day. I love that, Jason.
Yep. And I also just think, people are thinking of rituals. Again, don't get bogged down into taking a list at like Tony Robbins or Hal Elrod and doing all this stuff and feeling bad that you can't do it all, right? I mean, that's not the point. You have to find what works for you. So try experimenting. And also, nothing will work if you have too much resistance. So try to find ways to do things that are helpful for yourself and work them in where you're going to find the least amount of resistance. Otherwise, sometimes it feels like you're walking uphill both ways.
So very true. So let's get into the meat of this episode here on Thriving Beyond for Thrive Nation. So let's get into the toughest life storm that you face, Jason, whether it be personal, business, or maybe both. But if you could paint that global view of that picture for us, and then bring us down to that curbside view so we can see really day to day what was going on and why it was the toughest life storm that you faced.
Yeah, I'd say there's probably 2 of them. And, one of them was I had a business partner when I was first starting out on the journey a few years ago that I had a huge falling out with. And, it was one of my really good friends, and it really was something that hurt me. Some things he did that really, shook my confidence in like people and relationships a little bit. And, I had to really come to terms with how to go forward by myself. But that was the best thing, because I found out of that lesson was I was making myself be Robin instead of Batman, and that I wasn't really leading the way that I should have been because I just deferred to someone else because I believed in them more than I believed in myself, and believed more in what we were doing, but I needed to really know that I could steer the ship. And I was the idea behind a lot of the things we were doing, but I wasn't really embracing that fully. And so I think the universe put that in my way for me to step up in my life. And that was really important. I think the other thing was that I had someone really close in my life that I had been, dating for a couple of years, almost took their life. And I stepped in and fortunately helped them where no one else did. And, that taught me a lot about love, relationship building, trust, and then putting yourself out there in that moment in your hand when you are extremely vulnerable and hoping someone else takes it. And that when you set up relationships the right way, people will take your hand when that moment really matters the most. And they have to be receptive, but they will because they trust and they care about, they know that you care about them and you want the best for them. And so, those are probably 2 things in my life that really have, probably fundamentally changed me in the last couple of years to get me where I am today.
Thank you for sharing that, Jason. And
Welcome.
You said Batman. Now, how did you know I'm a huge Batman fan?
Well, I just found out. So maybe I'm a mind reader. So.
Yeah, so I definitely picked up be Batman, right? Don't be Robin, be Batman. And sometimes, yes, situations, struggles, turmoil is going to happen. It might bleed into other aspects of our life, like you mentioned, relationships, so on and so forth. So what was one of those aha moments that empowered you, like out of that situation, Jason?
I started to really take, after this falling out part had happened, I started to look and saying, what was the point in repairing this relationship? Because I really had no upside in it because I was doing all this work and it wasn't my dream anymore. And I knew that when I looked at everything going forward, I thought to myself, am I better off working with someone or better off doing my own thing? And I said to myself, you know what? I have to live my own life and do my own thing and go on this road by myself because I'm just using this as a crutch. Because I'm afraid of stepping up because it could all fall apart, right? And that brought me to, quit my job, which I don't recommend people do. I think it's better to have a side hustle, which this was. But I knew at that point that if I didn't do something pretty dramatic and all this stuff, I would never be able to see if this was ever going to work out or not. So I had to do some things that were more extreme in order to do it all, right? And I think we all at some point face a crossroads, right? So that to me was really it. And then, I started to take a look at all the things that I had done and we had done in business and things. And I was like, man, like I can do this, right? There's like all these things that I'm learning and doing. And I really don't need anyone else because I do have a vision and a path a little bit right here. I can see my voice in this. And if I keep putting my nose to the grindstone and keep moving forward and doing all the things that I have done in the past, I'm going to get much farther if I can just do this without having to defer decisions off to someone else who actually isn't leading and actually isn't putting as much into the business as I was. So I was like, you know what? Just take the leap of faith and let's just go and do whatever it is that, I'm going to do. And then just took the leap.
Thank you for sharing that perseverance. And that's something that we mentioned on this show, Thriving Beyond, many, many times. It's the perseverance, the grit that helps get you through that rut, that deep moment of angst where you don't think you can actually make it through that situation. And you have, Jason. So we're grateful and definitely honored to have you on this episode, sharing your story and giving us some of the best advice that you've received from a coach or maybe a mentor or maybe a family member that helped pick you up. If you could share that.
Yeah, you know what? I've always think to myself, because I'm an extrovert and relationship building is something that I'm really good at. And I found that whenever I can be of service to other people, great things happen. And I went to a Jesuit high school growing up, and the mantra in the school was be a man for others, right? And that was based on doing service for other people, meaning helping them, right? In any way. You could be helping them, you could be giving to them, you could be inspiring to them. I think when you do that and you get out of your own head, you can do magic. And I think in the world today, when you give at a level where you don't ask for anything back in return and you get unattached from outcomes, you're in a way better place. Because then you're able to get way more back from people in your life and people that you help through things that are going. So for me, it's really, more about that. The other thing that's really helped me is realizing that vulnerability is really the most courageous thing we can ever do. And when you are your most vulnerable and you can share that with other people, you are your most powerful. And I think in today's world, a lot of times vulnerability in businesses look like a weakness. The number one shame trigger for men, is being vulnerable, and it's seen as a weakness. For women, it's body image. Right. But you have to embrace these things because that is where your power is. And that's where we don't want to get into because we don't want to step in that uncertainty because it seems painful. We feel like we're judged. People might reject us or reject what we're doing. But the reality is that really doesn't happen.
Right.
So, for me, it's really two things. I think it's really being of service to other people in any way that I can, and also just being vulnerable in those moments. And when things are not going great, I think about how can I be even more vulnerable, and it's almost always the answer. And stepping into uncertainty of serving other people.
I love that. A quote that keeps coming to mind is money is the echo of value, right?
Yep. Very true.
And then you mentioned that, I don't know if it was a mantra or a quote that you saw back at your Jesuit high school, be a man for others.
Yes. mantra. Yep.
And we can definitely relate. I went to an all-boys Jesuit high school for 2 years. And it's kind of funny you mentioned that.
Yeah, I went to a Loyola Academy, and at the time it was the biggest all-boys Jesuit, college prep school. And, that was really helpful. And, they made us go out. Well, I made us, but it was part of it to go out and, do service when we were juniors and seniors. And it really opened my eyes because we went into, some really like difficult places for people, right? And areas in the city that were, not the best. And doing that helped me really push me outside my comfort zone to meet other people. And it also taught me that everyone's really the same. No matter what race, creed, religion, what sect, whatever it is, we're all people. And inside of us are very similar things. And we have more in common than we have dissimilar. It's just you have to look for those things and find them and keep reminding it.
Absolutely. Love that. Thank you for sharing. So what's a 2 or 3 step formula you could share with our Thriving Beyond listeners that could help them get through some of their adversity, whether it's similar adversity as yours or even more difficult adversity that you could advise?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is that I would write down on a piece of paper 3 things that you could do this week that would put you outside your comfort zone. And I'd pick simple things, right? So they could be things like every time I go into a place this week, I'm going to hold the door open for one person and say hi, right? If that makes you a little bit nervous, then do that, right? I'm going to ask every person I buy something with, how's your day going, right? How's your week going? Are you having or ask a question that you're having a great week or something like this to uplift people. Maybe it is that you're trying to get in better physical shapes. You said, you know what, this week I'm going to, make sure that I go 3 times to go work out, whatever that is, right? So it doesn't have to be crazy things, but I would pick some things that you could do. Because the more uncertainty that we can live with, the more we will grow. And I think the next thing I would do is I think relationships are the key reason we are here, and connection and belonging are central to our core. So the other thing that's helpful is I do go to a lot of charity nonprofit events. Nonprofits are museums, opera, symphony, whatever, because those areas have major influencers that are going out. And so I recommend people just Google in your area and go find a place or two to go to a happy hour. Very inexpensive. And, if money is an issue, you can always ask to volunteer at these events and go for free. And you'll start meeting some new people. And often we need some new life, some people who are in the mode of helping, giving, and inspiring in our life. And those are great places to find them.
I agree with you 1,000% on every single one of these, Jason. So first thing, just to highlight your points. So take it off of you and just serve others. Like you mentioned, just focus on holding doors open, just being of service to others, just the little stuff. And then second, it's okay to be uncertain about the future. There's nothing wrong with that. We go through periods of times when everything is stable, certain. We've got food, shelter, so on and so forth. And then we go through the new season of transition and where things are uncertain. You might have lost your job, significant other, so on and so forth. And that's okay because now we can step outside of our comfort zone and stay out of there and learn and grow and really thrive. That's where Thrive Nation, you grow the most.
Yep. And there's a lesson always there, right? And I think we always have to look for the positive lesson because it's really there. When one thing ends, there's a reason why. It's what happens for most people is they get caught up in the moment. They don't look at the continuum of the experience itself, right? So people look at a breakup and they look at that time and they say to themselves, well, that's horrible. And they get all upset. But you've got to realize that you've dated people and been in relationships way before that person right there and way after them. And there's a lesson in reasons. And if we learn from that, then we will look back and that is just an experience we had to get us to the place where we're meant to be.
Amen. And then the third thing that you highlighted was connection. Super, super important. So you said connect with nonprofits, be out there rubbing elbows with people that maybe you don't normally rub elbows with, but be in there as a part of their community to serve others and experience new things. So volunteering for Habitat for Humanity, that's another cool thing. And
yes,
definitely volunteerism is high on my list as well.
Yep.
So I love that, man. Awesome. So let's get into the last question here. This is a deep dive question, so don't worry about how long or the pause or anything. But if 100 years from today there was a statue that was erected in Jason Treu's name, and it had the one thing that you would be remembered for, Jason, what would that one thing be?
I would probably say on that statue, remember to be a leader in your own life. And the reason I say that is when you go and tell a vulnerable story about yourself to another person, no matter if it's a stranger or someone you make it safe for them to share. When you lead with authenticity in your life, you make it safe for someone else to be authentic. And you can either do this in a business sense or personal sense. So when you lead and you can fill in the blank, you will get other people to follow you and to be these fantastic things like vulnerable, authentic, speak their own truth, be generous. And you can create some amazing things in your life and affect people in a positive change, no matter who you are, where you live, what you do, whatever. It's just that we often don't step up and lead in our own life. And it's time to, I think about what you're doing now and make a commitment to yourself to lead in the small ways, because that can have a major effect not only in your own life, but of every single person you touch along the way.
Thank you for sharing that, man. I love that. So if you could share one more tip for some of our listeners that are aspiring speakers and would love to leverage media, as you've done over 400 podcasts, radio shows, and TV shows as well, what is the one tip that you could give them as noobs to try to get on some of these media outlets?
Well, I think a great way to do it is a podcast, because I think it's the easiest place to start with the least amount of work overall. And what you want to do is think about what value you have, right? And you've got to sit down and create something and do research so you're an expert in a niche, right? Whatever that might be. And then you from there start Googling podcasts, right? Like Google podcast and entrepreneur, or podcast and relationship building, and then figure out the people that have podcasts and get out there, and start tracking them down and pitching people to go on people's shows, because people are always looking, for guests. The other thing you can do is there's a company called Interview Connections that you can hire for like $400 a month that can get you on 4 or 5 podcasts a month. So you can do that, and it's pretty low cost to start building up some, your resume. And I think you just got to take it piece by piece by piece. I first started out doing podcasts. I just pitched them because I started looking at what were the people, probably like 2 years ago doing that were getting them a lot more visibility, that were outside of, getting in a magazine, right? Or being on TV or even being on radio. And I was like, okay, well, podcasts are the thing. And it was the easiest thing to do, because writing articles, that's great. And you can write byline. And I'm a big fan of that because it makes you crystallize your thinking. But you can only do so many articles and write so many things because of the time involved. So you've got to find other outlets to get your message across. And podcasts are probably the easiest place to start from. So again, what I would do is just look at what you're really good at, an area that, and you can really niche it down to almost anything. Research it, spend some time for a couple of weeks making sure you're doing it. And then, look at some podcasts and start pitching yourself out. In the beginning, you're not going to sound near as good as you will over time, but that's like in anything else in life, right? You just got to do it. So don't be afraid. If you study it and learn it, you'll know it well enough, and you'll probably have of information that you can share with people that will make an impact on it. And, I had to pitch a lot of podcasts before I started getting on some of them, right? So I didn't really I looked at it like sales, right? I didn't look at who said no. I looked at who said yes. Mm-hmm. And, and it was funny because I went through a couple of my podcasts that I had pitched almost 2 years ago to people, and I looked back, and some people, I was on a podcast not long ago with someone who I pitched that long ago, who I hadn't pitched back to, that I saw in my email that I pitched them, and they never responded back. So if you keep doing it, a lot of the things that you didn't get on, eventually you will. So you just got to look at the long game and understand that, and just take action.
That's it. It's all about the persistence. Perseverance will get you there. And
yes.
Also being congruent with your message. A lot of times I see people that should not be talking about certain subject matter want to be subject matter experts. And you got to go back to your core. What is it that you know, that nobody else can say you don't know? And you break it down, you keep it that simple, you'll never go wrong. You're going to tap into that vein, that well of content that you could be on 1,000 podcasts and tell the same story, and people will be like, yes, I'm resonating with him. I know exactly what he's talking about. Yes, I've lived through that, and he is right, dead on with his story.
Yeah, because I think what happens is that people take too big of a step, right, in what their content is. For instance, you'll see a lot of people who are like life coaches, and the problem that you have if you don't specifically niche down what does that mean, then no one can figure out what you stand for. So you've got to pick something that you own that's like a lot smaller on doing. It's like I did my new website, and I looked at myself, and I didn't redo it until I thought to myself, who would be my ideal client? Who's my best first client? And what I found was if I'm working in a corporate setting, it's a CEO, because if I can do great things with that person, they'll have me work with their executive team, right? So that for me is a way better client for me than just an entrepreneur as a solopreneur, because I really have nowhere else I can go with that person in a coaching aspect. So you've got to figure out when you're talking about something, what is it that you can niche down on? No, in the beginning, you might say, I don't know. Well, then you just got to put a stake in the ground and you'll iterate and find it. But you can't be everything to everyone. You can't be Tony Robbins, because Tony Robbins did that when there was no competition. And now there are people out there. So figure out some niche and go after it, and you can become very successful.
Amen. Yep. Tony Robbins started off, as very little competition, as you mentioned, but he put a big stake in the ground and said, give me all of your worst patients to all the therapists, and I will help them in under an hour. That was his claim to fame. He just guaranteed results, and that's what helped his stake in the ground, and that's what positioned him as a subject matter expert.
I love it. Peter Diamandis is another great person. So he's got that thing about, he talks about 10xing results, and he's one of Fortune's, top 50 leaders in the world. And I've heard him speak with Tony Robbins because they're very good friends. And he talks about all the time about how people underestimate their ability to get results, and you've got to pick it. And I remember my best client is a chairman of a really $1 billion company, or the board. And I started working with him about 2.5 years ago. And I told him, within like the first couple of months, like, I'm going to make you $1 billion. And, I know that he thought to me, like, there's no way that's possible. Right. And now, it's not all realized, but probably about 2/3 of the way there, with almost very little investments of total that he had to do. So, but if you don't pick big goals like that, you have nowhere to shoot from. And at that point, when you pick that big of a goal, the great thing is that you've nothing to lose. So you're willing to try anything. And that's what separates you from everyone else.
Amen. You got to be a risk taker. Risk takers they reap all the rewards. That's what Tony Robbins says too. Anyways, enough about Tony and Peter Diamandis. By the way, read their stuff. They got some good stuff out there. But let's get back into Jason Treu. Jason, where can we find you and your book, Social Wealth? So you can find pretty much everything on my website. It's jasontreu.com. It's JASONTREU. That's JasonTREU.com, all one word. And my book, Social Wealth, is on Amazon, or if you go to the website, you can just link from there. On my social media is there. There's a free giveaway on my website on how to create influence with other people. And there's blogs and other posts and more coming. And the website I just launched like literally a week ago. So there's going to be a lot more things coming up. Phenomenal. Stellar. Jason, thank you so much. And if you could tell us just your tagline for your book, if anybody out there is interested in picking up Social Wealth, what would that one tagline be for your book? Relationships are everything. Learn how to build extraordinary ones. Right on. That's it. Name of the game. Build relationships, be of service, and be grateful, right? And keep going, keep growing, and keep thriving, because it's way better than surviving.
Thanks for listening. For recaps and to claim bonus gifts, head over to thriving beyond podcast.com. Keep thriving.